My name is Morten, and I'm one of the 3 founders of Zendesk and CTO. I am super excited to be here today and to get to tell my story. First of all, thanks to the organizers. I met a few of you during the week. Great events, great audience here. So let's get this going. Okay, so we start out with some numbers of Zendesk. And just to show where we are currently, last week we announced on our most recent earnings call that we now have 1,100 employees and 64,000 paid accounts around the world. We cater to our customers from 12 offices around the world, and we started in Denmark, as you may know. I moved to San Francisco 6 years ago and went public last year. Today, I'm going to address some of the questions I mostly get from European startups. The first one being, should we move to San Francisco? And after a little back and forth on that, well, should we have engineering in San Francisco? So I'm going to cover some of our experiences from our journey and hopefully help answer those questions. Now, this is where our headquarters is today, downtown San Francisco. We have around 400 employees here, 500-ish. And that means that roughly half of our staff is in headquarters, but more than half is outside the US. That means Zendesk has truly become a global company, and we need to make sure we have great communication both directions. We can't just do top-down decision-making and expect the offices around the world to follow suit. The highlights so far, as I mentioned, our IPO last year. You IPO to show the market that you're a mature company, that customers can rely on you. You make things public so they can see the process your compliance processes. And for us as entrepreneurs, we also IPO to celebrate, because that's not something you do very often. When you're busy and heads down working, you always see problems, challenges, and obstacles overcome. I often get asked, so when did you know you were successful? And although objectively you're successful at a Series A, then it doesn't feel like that, because all you work on is problems and challenges. But the IPO definitely a day for us to feel good about ourselves. This is the growth we've been through. So 6 years ago, 12 employees in the US, and now more than 1,100. This is the kind of growth you need to be able to have a company that's mature enough and caters to all the facilities of a modern organization. Around 25% of our employees are in product development, and I'll get into those guys now. So the story starts really in Copenhagen 10 years ago. We do say we were founded in 2007. That's when we went live. Before then were some painful years where we built the product in our spare time, Alexander and me. Alexander is the third co-founder. Now, times were great in Copenhagen 10 years ago. We were all consultants, living good lives as independent consultants, high in demand. Whenever you're off work, no stress, no nothing. It's a beautiful life and all the free time you could ever possibly want. But something was missing, The 3 of us had worked together in different constellations earlier during the .com days. So we got together here, as you can see, on a scaffold outside Mikkel's apartment, and we are obviously being very upset about the state of customer service software. The thing was, at this point in time, Mikkel and I had been selling enterprise-level customer service software, which was a really terrible product. It was a terrible proposition. We brought in Alex, who was this genius product guy, to join our team and start looking at alternatives. Now, this was the inspiration then. It really looked like this, and I think it's still the state of the union many places in the world. People would sell this using enterprise sales. Sales guy walks in, convinces CIO to buy $1 million worth of software, invite a bunch of process consultants in that map out processes for the company, another $1 million, then force this down the throats of all the employees of the companies and expect them to succeed and deliver great customer service. It doesn't work that way. So that was what we had been working on, and we had seen that, and we wanted to start out building something that catered to SMBs, first and foremost, something simple and elegant. And that's sort of when we set out to do it. But what do you do? This is Copenhagen 10 years ago. How do you get started? So 10 years ago, this was the state of the startup ecosystem, frozen dead. This was the state of VC in Denmark, frozen dead, nothing, no life. We had no luck, absolutely whatsoever, in getting any sort of traction with investors. Today, obviously, this is wonderful. It's a very different world. But for us, we really had to scramble to figure out how do we move on with this idea of ours. So we ended up convincing some friends and family to invest in us, which of course is a big risk. It's never easy to lose money from someone you really care about. But we did that, and eventually, we managed to to build this piece of software in our spare time and then launch it in October 2007 and go full-time on it. Now, full-time means that the three of us dedicate our full working life to this project going onwards. And that's what we've been doing ever since. So we worked out of Alexander's apartment, downtown Copenhagen, very modest, up below the roof. We sat around this wooden door on two sawhorses, very startup-ish, and built our product from there. We did manage to get some attention from the VCs, the angel in Europe and some VCs in the US that allowed us to move to the US. And this is where the fun begins. So we moved to Boston in the middle of 2009, and I started assembling the first engineering team there. I was immediately impressed with the people we could attract in the US, in Boston. They came in and were very, charming, good at promoting themselves, selling themselves, because American culture is just different from the Europe I was used to. I was used to people applying for a job and coming in being very modest, and whereas Americans, they're very charming and engaged people, super good communicators, but they're also just good at selling themselves just a tiny bit better than we were used to. I was not prepared for this, so I immediately went ahead and hired a bunch of great guys, only to find out that my expectations were misaligned. And that's where we really first learned that whenever you go to some other country, you have to really get your feet wet with the culture first and understand these people and figure out what's a good hiring process look like in this local country. So we established a great hiring process as a result of that. That was sort of lesson number one. The moment we set our feet in the US, we had moved our intellectual property over, and the three of us had committed to move to the US. That moment, we got 4 Series B offers. So after all these years of struggle, we suddenly had good offers on our hands, good cards. And the Series B offer we took allowed us to move on to San Francisco. And then you ask yourself, why San Francisco? What's so special about it? We were in Boston, that's great. It's on the East Coast, close to Europe, it's fantastic. But San Francisco is truly special because there's a long tradition of startups. And what happens is, a company grows up, becomes successful, and the first few hundred, maybe even 1,000 people in that company, they learn so much, they'll jump out and start new startups, and it's a positive feedback cycle of knowledge. So I do believe every startup needs to go there and understand why this is so magical. And once you realize it, you can better make a decision whether you need to have a representation there or not. So everything was just glorious. We're in San Francisco. What could possibly be better, Well, it wasn't all roses. There certainly was a period of time here where we hit an inflection point in terms of scale, and everything got really hard. We didn't have any networks there. We didn't know anyone. So we had to figure out how do we hire people when we don't know anyone. We're competing with Twitter, Facebook, Google. How do we even hire someone? You need to learn in the US, you work with recruiters, and it's common that they take maybe 30% of the first year's salary as a fee to make this happen. Sort of like real estate agents do, You connect to people and that's it, right? So you have to be to realize that paying $30,000, to hire someone, it's not uncommon, and you're actually expected to do that once you have a Series A or B. Okay, so technology was super hard. We had a bunch of success on the customer side, and it's super hard to hire engineers fast enough to give real responsibility. So everyone had their backs against the wall, and could it possibly get any worse? Absolutely. There are times in a fast-growing startups like ours, from a few to 64,000 paid customers over a span of a few years, where you get so much load that it's incredibly hard to deal with. And you will run into technical challenges. So this gets a little technical, but there's a point to this. So we had made a bet on SSD drives very early on, and that caused our databases to crash hard, very hard. They couldn't get back up, actually. And we were scrambling and waking up in the middle of the night implementing workarounds. It's a terrible time for us. But eventually we managed to do a workaround that worked for us, and then we had a script that could reproduce this error. And through our network, in Silicon Valley, we got a hold of some of the engineers at MySQL who worked on this database technology, and we sent them the script, and the day after we had a patch. So I would never have known what to do if I sat in Europe and I was in that situation. It was super easy to find people who were super qualified to address our specific needs, and you see a lot of that in Silicon Valley, and that's something I really, truly appreciate, both on the business side but also on the engineering side. All right. Further, hiring kept being hard, to not say impossible over there, and we had to think about what can we do to attract talent, what can we do to get the right people to join us, and what's our advantage here? Well, being Danish turned out to be one advantage because we realized we understand Danish culture, so why don't we sort of go back to Denmark? Why don't we go back to Denmark and hire an engineering team there? And that became our first outsourced engineering team. So it's a co-located team of people who sit together, and they have an office downtown Copenhagen. We quickly after did the same in Australia. We found some people we could trust to run with it and hired them to build up an Australian office, an Australian presence. So these two experiments turned out really well for us, and the takeaway was that if you give teams, remote teams, autonomy, like complete autonomy, these are smart guys, give them ownership and autonomy, give them a direction, say this is what you're working on, run with it, then things can really work out well for you and scale well for you. We've since replicated this model, so we now do product development in 9 different offices. And the key point here, again, autonomy, responsibility. It really works. So we, far from micromanage these different teams, we give them a big project or a big chunk of the application and say, this is now your ownership, make the most of it. Yeah, so 35 development teams in 9 different locations, all working together and on different parts of the product. So we divide our product into segments that cater to different audiences. Each of these segments is subdivided into feature applications, infrastructure, and all that. And each of those components belong with a given team. So they have a mission, it's very well understood, and they're not going to step on anyone else's toes in getting there. So from the ground up, the basic building blocks we use to make all this happen is, of course, like really basic APIs. We have API agreements. So between the teams, they know how to communicate via an API that's published. Like 90% of the APIs we use internally, also our public APIs, so documented and used by our customers, partners as well. Outside APIs, we build great tools. Tools are important to make sure things are done in the same way consistently, so everyone knows how things are done. And not least, most recently, because so many teams with so many smart people who want to have their own creativity, we need to come up with standards we can agree to. So we do a lot in terms of standards now, say, let's make a standard for what a good user interface looks like. Let's make a standard for how we scale our databases. Let's make a standard for this and that. And these standards we try to adhere to, so we speak the same language, although we have the autonomy to move as individuals. From the front of it, from the customer perspective, it's just one beautifully simple application. Different, mobile, iPads, all that stuff. It looks sleek, it's great because of standards, despite all these different teams juggling the balls beneath the surface. But behind the scenes in Zendesk, so much more stuff is going on. This is, what we've been shipping for the last 9 months. It's a bunch of stuff. Some of these things are like months, if not years, in the making. Advanced security features like cross data center replication. It's not easy to build. HIPAA compliance, not easy to just attain. So all of these things take lots of efforts, and this is where we really spent our investments. All right, and that's all from a team that looked like this just 5 years ago. And I like to think that many of the startups here today look like this now. And the sky's really the limit. If you get lucky and you get your timing right, you can take it very, very far. So just to sum up, this is my experience as a founder. This is my journey over the last 10 years. I would say the first third of that time in Zendesk was spent building product, building features, building a lot of it, making a very wide feature set. The second third of that was about, okay, now we've got to get an organization going. My job here is to help that organization and stabilize it when it's wiggly and catch the drop balls and put out fires and see it grow and become a true, solid organization. And then the last third of it is more like, okay, let me try and remove myself more from the equation such that the organization can really scale. Because as an individual, as a founder, most importantly, you are to be a catalyst and never a bottleneck. So that's really your job. And then when you get to the lower right corner over here, that's where you get to go to Slush and meet nice people like you guys. All right. Just on a finishing note, I really wanted to talk 1 minute about what to expect, what's next. And I think that's a super exciting topic because for us, things have been changing so much over the last 10 years. Last week, I heard this podcast. I listened to Danish podcasts, and it featured my Danish Danish founder, Tommy Ahlers, who's a Danish entrepreneur. Danish colleague, and he was talking about how when we think about the future, we think very linearly. We look at the tools we have today, and then we plan based on those. But if you look behind, past you, our history and the development is nothing. It's not looking like linear at all. It's exponential. When we started, yeah, we could see that Web 2.0 was happening. We could see there are some trends that would allow us to build better enterprise software, and we could deliver it in a browser. But we couldn't know that social media was going to happen. We couldn't know that Facebook and Twitter would come around and amplify the voice of the customer, which turned out to be really important if you do customer service. We couldn't know about the iPhone, that makes customer service interaction available everywhere. No one could have predicted that. And we couldn't predict how impactful SaaS would be. And the cloud, you have AWS, you have the computing power of the world at your fingertips. We couldn't have foreseen that. So these were not bets that we made. These are just these dark horses that come in from the right, and if you're lucky, you get to rein one or two of them in, and it helps propel you forward. So when you think about tomorrow and think about your startups, keep an ear to the ground and pay attention to what goes on out there, because really you have an opportunity here to catch something magnificent and build something great. And that is it for me. Thank you very much.